All right. Hi, everybody. It is 8 o'clock on Monday night, and you're here with Fiveable tonight to talk about photosynthesis. My name is Kari Parnan. I'm one of the AP Biology Fiveable streamers, and tonight we're going to look at photosynthesis, which is a big topic that I know is one of the more difficult ones, or at least one of the more intimidating ones for a lot of students. So hi guys, hi Dakota, hi Sandra. So I will spend a lot less time going over diagrams and talking myself and opening it up more for questions at the end than I typically do. So normally I only spend like 5 minutes at the end with questions, but I just have a feeling we're going to have a lot of questions. So we'll keep it open. I'm going to let everybody just log in. We have 6 people so far. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We'll be looking at photosynthesis tonight. It'll be great. All right. All right. So while we wait for everyone to get here, why don't we all share a quick one-word description of what the weather is like where you're at. I guess you can use an emoji too, but feel free to also just say the word. Cold. Yeah, it's cold here too. Although today it was actually sunny and not raining, which was good. All right. So if you want to just join in and use the chat box to say what the weather's like where you're at. Freezing. Okay. Humid, windy. All right. Kind of ties in with photosynthesis in plants, just because depending on where you live and the weather, it'll give us a variety and diversity of plants that maybe have a difference in photosynthesis too. So, all right, but most of us are living in cold weather. Oh, that's right. You're in Texas. That's right. Oh my gosh. Texas can be really hot this time of year, but it can also be lots of rain, right? Humid and windy. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let's get started. We have about 7 people now. We're still waiting on a few who have registered, but again, my name is Kari Parnan, AP Biology teacher. Oh, Hannah, it totally snowed here too on Halloween. Yeah, we live in Michigan, so it snowed. It was kind of freezing rain and snow throughout the night. So my children they didn't care because they're young, but it was very cold. But anyway, I'm one of the Fiveable streamers, and I taught AP Biology for a couple years, and now just focusing on Fiveable streaming. I know you guys are in AP Biology right now. Oh yeah, I live in Chicago. That's where we used to live. We just moved from Chicago to Michigan, Hannah. So we'll be getting even more snow in Michigan, which will be fun. But anyway, so yeah, tonight we're gonna look at photosynthesis, and hopefully you're either learning about photosynthesis right now, or even if you haven't, it's gonna be a nice preview for you. So let's get going. If you haven't already, hold on, let me go back to my other screen here. Sorry about that. If you haven't already, make sure you're following Think Fiveable, just because they're really good about posting updates and information about what's coming up for your other classes. How many of you are in another AP class other than AP Biology? So just say yes, or put up an emoji of a hand going up if you're in another another class other than AP Bio. Yes, man. Okay. Yeah, I figured most of you are. Most of you are upperclassmen, juniors, and seniors, so you're probably in a variety of AP classes. So welcome, and I'm really glad that you're here. You're making this a priority to go over one of the more complex topics in AP Biology. So really kudos to you for logging in and taking the time to do this. I know sometimes I've talked to some students who kind of just let the audio run for the stream, which is fine most of the time. So you can kind of just listen as we go over stuff and then feel like you've learned something. But for this particular stream, I'll let you know and I'll say, hey, we're going over a diagram right now. Make sure you're actually watching this, because otherwise I think you'll miss out. So make sure, just listen up. And if I say, hey, like, make sure you're here for the diagram, click back to the screen so that you are for sure with us. and getting to see all the good diagrams, okay? All right, so after tonight's stream, tomorrow night there will be, or not tomorrow night, very soon, there will be one about the environmental impact on enzymes. So basically just how, if pH changes or temperature changes, salinity, things like that, how would an enzyme change, or how would the functioning of an enzyme be affected. Then I'll be streaming on cellular respiration next week, I believe November 11th. So these are my two big topics. I love talking about them. I love learning about them. Photosynthesis and cell resp. They're big, big topics. So make sure you check in for that. And then the end of this unit's almost over. We're already done with unit 3. Almost. There'll be a unit, a stream about fitness, which kind of ties in evolution. I know some of you have already learned about evolution and natural selection, so that'll be a good review. Okay, tonight we will look at what is cellular energy, just briefly talk about it, then the basics of photosynthesis, some practice FRQs, and then open questions. So ideally, if you're already learning about this and you have some questions, you can ask one. And usually I have people just type it in the box, but because this is such a heavy topic, there is on the bottom portion of your screen a part that says ask a question. So if you do have a question at any point, please use that. Use the ask a question button, because then what will happen is that you can all vote for each other's questions. So for example, like if Dakota asks a question on there, like Rachel, Sandra, and Hannah could actually vote for that question to be answered first. Or, if there's so many questions and I can't get to all of them, you have a voice in voting for which ones you'd prefer me to go over. So again, if you have a question, there's a little thing at the bottom that says ask a question, and you could type your question in there. And then at the end, we'll go over those. All right. Okay, so what is cellular energy? This unit 3, is called cell energetics. And so remember, we just talked about unit 2, which was all about cells and organelles, compartmentalization, structure, function, all that good stuff. And one of the biggest things about cells is that they need a constant input of energy, right? So think of like your human body are made up of of cells that make up all of our tissues and organs so that we can survive. Every cell needs energy, right? A lot of us tend to think of cells just needing oxygen, but every cell needs an input of energy. If we were to think on a macro scale, like a large scale of the human body, if we didn't take in food, right? That's our energy source. If we didn't take in food, we would no longer be able to function. So if we think microscopically on cells, every single cell of every organism, every living thing, this is biology, right? So the study of living things, every cell needs energy all the time, okay? So that's what cellular energy is talking about, is how do cells get energy, and then what do they do with it? How do they use it? All right, so if you think of it like a battery, right? If you have something that's battery operated, if the battery has no more juice, right, or no more chemical energy, it's not going to have any electrical output, electrical energy. So cells are the same thing. If there's not a filled battery, it's not going to be able to do its job. So a muscle cell isn't going to be able to do its job to contract. Bone cells aren't going to be able to remain strong to provide structural support. And again, I keep talking about human examples just because we are humans, and I think it's a nice way to ground us in the content. But it's true also for plants and protists and fungus and bacteria. So two big things that we could talk about with cellular energy. Like I said, all living things require it. And then another, if we think about like the law of thermodynamics and if conservation of energy, if you take in physics, right, energy can't just be created or destroyed. So hopefully maybe you've taken physics. If you're not already in it, I'd recommend it because I'm also a physics teacher, so I'm a big proponent of taking physics. But anyway, so energy, all things require it, and it's not just created or destroyed, right? So we have to always think of, okay, if something is using energy, that had to have come from something else. It didn't just pop out of nowhere, right? So it's transformed or transferred from one thing to the next. So that's a big picture of cellular energy. The other big thing that we're going to see today and on the photosynthesis stream is that products and reactants of one function is usually used in another. So I know when I talked about enzymes like last week, we talked about, somebody asked about energy coupling and the idea of, when we have two reactions, maybe one is exergonic and the other is endergonic. So one is not creating energy. One has an output of energy, and then the other one's going to use that energy to run their own reaction. So we'll see that today as well, that we've got a lot of recycling happening. And, cells are smart, right? We're highly evolved organisms. We're complex organisms, especially eukaryotic cells, that it makes sense for things to couple rather than just everyone be individualized and one reaction has nothing to do with another. It's really nice when one can be used for the other. Okay, it's kind of like leftovers, right? If you have a bunch of food in the fridge and you use it for dinner, if you have leftover food, you're not just going to throw it out, or I hope you don't, right? You can use those ingredients for something else. And so nothing is wasted in biology. So here's a really nice picture. I just drew it. Again, if you've been to my streams before, I like to draw things. I think it helps. And so I encourage you to do that too. I encourage you to take a topic and draw out what it means to you. So for example, here, this is where I'm trying to model the idea of products and reactants being used in other reactions. So at the top here, I have this little like yellow squiggly arrow to represent light energy and it going toward this chloroplast. And so if you have not learned about photosynthesis yet, the chloroplast is the organelle in the plant cell where photosynthesis happens. And so those little like green stack of pancakes, those are going to be your thylakoids, which house the chlorophyll, which is the pigment that allows photosynthesis to happen. And so chloroplast is the organelle in the plant or the photosynthetic cell, and then chlorophyll is the pigment that allows to capture that light energy. So anyway, so there's your chloroplast, and it's showing on the left-hand side of chloroplast is that we've got carbon dioxide and water, and those are going into the chloroplast. So those are reactants in order for photosynthesis to happen. And then our products are going to be glucose and oxygen. And so this idea of, I know a lot of people think of plants and us in terms of, what do we breathe in, what do we breathe out? And that's going to be complementary to what a plant breathes in and out. So a plant breathes in carbon dioxide. It takes in water, so those are its products. And then it breathes out oxygen and expels glucose or uses glucose as a product. And so that's happening at the top here for photosynthesis. At the bottom half, it's showing how mitochondria is going to use those reactants from photosynthesis. So mitochondria, to do cellular respiration, needs those two reactants that were the products of photosynthesis. And so it's this wonderful, beautiful cycle where things are not wasted. And so especially for a plant cell that has both chloroplasts and mitochondria, a chloroplast will make the oxygen, it'll expel the oxygen, and then a mitochondria can use it up right away to do cellular respiration to make ATP. And then obviously the mitochondria here, based on the diagram, is going to have a product of water and carbon dioxide, which are the reactants for photosynthesis. Okay, so feel free to make that diagram on your own. And I think it's just a really nice way to help you see how things are recycled and nothing is wasted. All right. Oh, good. We already have questions. Awesome. I'll look at those in a little bit. All right. So overview of photosynthesis, just basics. What are the things that can do photosynthesis? Obviously, we do not have chloroplasts in our cells. Go back to that cell structure stream if you need to, or in your textbook, right? Animal cells, we are animal cells. We do not have chloroplasts, so we don't do photosynthesis. So your teacher probably talked about what we would classify photosynthetic organisms as. They're called autotrophs. Auto meaning automatic, it can happen within itself. Troph meaning eat or food. And so the idea of it can automatically make food of its own. So if you're a plant cell, you can make your own sugar using the reactants within your environment. Photosynthesis is also another big thing that we'll talk more about in our evolution unit, is that it started in prokaryotic cells. So when we get to our really large evolution unit, we're going to talk about the geological timeline of what was around billions of years ago. And when prokaryotic cells started to do photosynthesis, it built oxygen in the atmosphere. And so it's a huge reason of why we have oxygen in the atmosphere. Another thing too is that it is a redox reaction. So if you're taking AP Chem now, or you took honors chem or something like that, you probably remember redox reactions, or maybe you called them oxidation reduction reactions. But the idea is it's within a chemical reaction. One part of it is going to be reduced and the other part is oxidized. And when we say reduced, I know the acronym I have my students learn is Leo the lion says GR. So Leo as an LEO. So the thing that is losing electrons is oxidized. So LEO, lose electron, oxidized. And then GR, meaning gain electron, is reduced. And so we have carbon dioxide that is reduced, which means it's actually gaining electrons, which kind of sounds weird when you're like, oh, it's reduced, so you think it's less, but that's why the acronym helps. So I'm going to type it in here because I don't have it on my PowerPoint. So I write Leo the lion says GR. So if you look at the chat box, I'm writing in some things that are not in the PowerPoint. So lose electrons equals oxidized, and then gain of electrons equals reduced. Okay. So that's something that I like to talk to my students about because it helps us grasp kind of following the atoms and following the matter, right? Because matter is also not destroyed in this. We talk about energy not being destroyed, but if we're talking about I've got 6 carbon molecules here, it doesn't just disappear, right? The actual carbon dioxide molecule is reduced, and so it gains electrons because it goes from being the CO2 molecule to having more hydrogens and more oxygens coupled onto it, and it becomes a completely different molecule. It goes from being a gas to an actual organic molecule. And then when something is oxidized, like I said here, it's losing electrons. We're going from water to oxygen. So it's a nice thing to be able to trace the atoms, the matter, and the energy within any of these chemical reactions. And I'll do the same thing in cellular respiration. We'll talk about what's being changed. Where does this carbon go? Where does this hydrogen go? And I think it just helps a lot. Okay. All right. Today's goals. I want you to be able to describe the photosynthetic processes that allow organisms to capture and store energy. So that's basically just giving an overview of what are the two reactions that are happening within photosynthesis, and then explain how cells capture energy from light and transfer it to biological molecules for storage and use. So these goals are actually objectives straight from the College Board. I like to use them because I think they're good prompts, and it's an example of, if you've been to my streams before, I talk about how a great way to study is not just to look at your notes over again and just kind of reread, but look at a statement like one of these, and if you aren't able to say or write about it off the top of your head, then you really need to work on it, right? So if you're looking at, well, actually, I don't know how cells capture energy. If you're looking at that, then you need to read up on it or pay attention today. But I think they're just really nice statements that could help you study. Okay. And then 2 more things. These aren't things I may not have time to actually go over this. But I have 2 questions that you can either take a quick snapshot of, but I would love it if you, okay, sorry. So I have 2 practice questions here that are not FRQs. They're not free response questions, but they're really nice in terms of, like, this is what I would give my students as like an opener. If your teacher ever does that, where there's like a question or a worksheet right when you walk in, this would be really great opener, where I'd say, hey, you've got 10 minutes, diagram the thylakoid, label photosystem 1, the electron transport chain, photosystem 2, and ATP synthase. And if I've got a kid who's like, I don't know, I have no idea how to draw that. And then I'd say, okay, well, let's go over this again. Let's reread about it. Let's look at the diagram that's given in the book, but then let's close the book and make your own diagram. So anyway, Dakota had a quick question. Is there a resource where we can find FRQ prompts? Yes. So honestly, if you go to Fiveable.me, there is something called the Ultimate Guide for AP Biology. I'm not sure if you have to be a Fiveable Plus member, but if you go there, it has FRQs. Like, hold on, let me check. I have it open on my screen. They have free response questions dated back to, of course, now I'm not in it. I think it has like 6 years or so of free response questions where there's prompts, and the AP College Board does release all FRQs, at least since 2000, since the change of the curriculum. So since 2013, I think. So if you just Google AP Biology FRQ, you should be able to look at old prompts, which would be helpful. Okay. The other question I'd want you to be able to do by the end of this, trace the path of an electron through photosynthesis, starting with water and ending with glucose. So we're talking about the electron. Label every molecule that it's part of and describe how it's used to produce ATP. So again, these two practice questions I would have used as openers or closers to my class after talking about photosynthesis. And here's the thing about what makes AP biology different than honors biology or freshman biology or whatever biology you've had before. I'm not just asking you, what are the reactants? What are the products? Where does this happen? Where does that happen? You're being asked more elevated questions. They're harder questions. So we're looking at electrons and the transfer of energy and things like that. So just be prepared for more difficult questions rather than just what is this? Where is this? How many ATP molecules? Like those kind of questions are so memorization based, and AP Bio has completely changed the test. It's not about memorization anymore. Okay. Anyway, so when we look at, oh, there's an old picture on there. Sorry about that. When we look at photosynthesis in general, I drew this kind of bean-shaped thing right here. That is the actual chloroplast. And this is just a diagram I drew to overview the entire thing. So photosynthesis has two reactions going on. So we've got light reactions up here, so it's green. And then we have this thing called the Calvin cycle. Okay, so the light reaction obviously depends on light, and then the Calvin cycle does not. And so biggest things here that your teacher may ask you about, which again, like I said, it's variation if they are asking you that, but it's still good to know. Like the light reaction, for example, it has water used in the light reaction, and then oxygen is being released. So it is good to know where these products and reactants are being consumed and released, but it's not enough to just know that. Okay, we have to know, well, what is happening to that molecule? Why is it being released? Why is it being used? So light reaction uses light energy and water, and then it releases O2. And if we look over here in the middle, we have a molecule called NADPH and ATP, which are going to the Calvin cycle to be used to fix carbon dioxide. And so we call it carbon fixation, where we're going from carbon dioxide gas to an actual organic molecule, which is kind of wild to think about, that it's a plant taking in a gaseous molecule and it's making it into an actual physical sugar that the plant or that the cell could use. It's actually super wild to think about. And then once that cycle is done, it recycles these other things, ADP and NADP plus. And so nothing is being wasted. That's like the idea of this whole cycle, right? Is that nothing here is being wasted. It's pretty wild. And I'll fix that. Once I post this Google slide, I'll fix it and post it without that weird enzyme thing going on. Okay. All right. So here's a picture within the light reaction. If we're just looking at the light reaction, inside each chloroplast, there are those green, well, I like to show them as green because they're filled with green chlorophyll. But they are filled with these pancake-shaped things called the thylakoid membrane. So this is a diagram of the membrane. We'll fill it in together in a little bit, but I just wanted to show you that this is one zoomed in layer of the membrane. If we were to zoom out, in terms of what we're talking about here, if I were to take a cross section from a leaf, I'd be here on the left. And so I'd have stacks of plant cells here, and each plant cell has a bunch of chlorophyll molecules, and that's these green things here. Okay, so here's another plant cell. Here's our chlorophyll with stacks of thylakoid. Okay, so this is the thylakoid. They look like green pancakes, kind of. but it's very similar to your mitochondria. If your teacher does cellular respiration first, your mitochondria has lots of curvy and inner membrane to increase surface area. Okay, I know I'm talking a lot. Sorry, everyone. This is crazy. I will be asking you questions, I promise. But like I said, photosynthesis is just super heavy. Actually, let me look at your questions. We'll take a break real quick. Let me look at your questions real quick. Awesome. What's the difference between? Oh, good. All right. I'm looking at all your questions, and they are wonderful. And we will get to them as soon as we get to the image of NADPH and ATP synthase. I'm just reading your questions real quick. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. We will get to those questions. Those are really, really good questions. Okay. So let's go back to the picture of our thylakoid membrane. So this is step 1 of photosynthesis. So we have a light reaction. It depends on light. It's a light dependent reaction. It's happening across the thylakoid membrane inside a chloroplast organelle. So it's lots of words. I know that, right? We're in a photosynthetic organism. We're inside of a chloroplast, which is an organelle inside of a photosynthetic organism cell. Okay. So sometimes when you're looking at diagrams like this, I almost hate to show diagrams like this because my students will memorize the diagram and then they'll have no idea what they're talking about. But they'll remember that this diagram looked like this and they know how to fill it in. So I encourage you to just look at this diagram, pay attention, follow along, but then look at the bigger picture. And it goes back to that preview question I had before where I said label the thylakoid, look at photosystem 1 and 2, the electron transport chain, and ATP synthase, because if you can't do that, then you're struggling. Okay, so here is, we're just going to kind of step by step in order of, let's say it's dark, it's super dark, you've put a plant in a dark closet, and all of a sudden you turn on the lights. Okay, what's going to happen there? What will happen to run photosynthesis? So we have a photon of light energy that's going to hit a chlorophyll molecule. So these little green circles are chlorophyll molecules. Chlorophyll is a pigment that makes photosynthetic organisms green. You have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, but that's kind of outside of the scope of the AP College Board. You may have a teacher who's super into knowing the difference between all the different types of chlorophylls, but that's kind of outside of the scope of what the College Board wants right now. Anyway, so we have light energy comes in. Obviously, a plant needs light. If you were to do an experiment, maybe you even did this in middle school, if you did an experiment and put a plant in the dark, it's not going to do anything. It's going to die eventually because without light, it can't make sugar. And if without sugar, it can't actually survive and have energy. Okay, so a light energy, a photon of light, a particle of light, that's what a photon is. That's where photosynthesis comes from. Photon of light hits that chlorophyll molecule. In my diagram, you can kind of see this like arrow jumping of energy kind of flying through. But right in the middle here is what I like. And it's showing that basically an electron from a chlorophyll molecule is being excited from that photon of light. So think of it, I kind of think of the analogy of where if it's warm outside and I'm in the sun, I'm absorbing energy, right? So like energy is kind of increasing. I've absorbed heat energy and I'm hot. So we have heat energy or light energy coming in. And so this chlorophyll molecule is like excited. Its kinetic energy is up. So we have an excited electron that goes up into this space. And then this yellow arrow here is the electron transport chain within this photosynthesis. So the electron transport chain is basically where you have this high energy electron that falls down in energy levels. And when it does that, when it falls, it releases energy. And so a huge important thing about that is that if it's releasing energy, it's falling down this it's pumping hydrogen ions across the membrane against a concentration gradient. Okay, so these gray circles here are hydrogen ions. And so if we think back to diffusion, things like to move from a high concentration to low, but we're harvesting the energy from an electron that's been excited. Okay, so light energy comes in, we have an excited electron, and then it falls down this electron transport chain. That energy pushes hydrogen ions down into the inside of your thylakoid. Okay, so light energy. This first complex here, this purple transmembrane protein within the thylakoid membrane, is called Photosystem II. The other one is called Photosystem I. The reason it's called Photosystem II is that scientists figured out about it second. So they knew all about Photosystem I first, and then they realized there was another one prior to it, but it was already called Photosystem I, so then this one's called Photosystem II. So it's out of order, but that's in order of when they discovered it. Okay, so light energy, boom, excites an electron within Photosystem II. That electron is now, the electron within the chlorophyll is missing. So it needs to be replaced. It wants to be replaced. And so that is where water, this is incredible, water splits, which is unreal because we know water to be a pretty stable molecule, right? It's got covalent bonds between your hydrogens and your oxygens. It likes itself to just stay there. Think about the high heat of vaporization, how hard it is, how much energy it takes to evaporate water. Okay, it's a stable molecule. But that missing electron within your photosystem II, it provides that power of ripping water apart, which is just wild. So water is ripped apart, forms oxygen and some hydrogen ions. Okay, so that's where oxygen is formed. That's why oxygen is formed, because water has been split. So that's another thing too. Keep track of your atoms. Keep track of what is being used up, what's being released. So oxygen is released. This oxygen is then free to go, and it can diffuse through the membrane and leave the chloroplast and go to the next mitochondria nearby of a plant cell, let's say, and be used for cellular respiration and can be continually used. Or it can be released into the atmosphere. If it's just leaving a leaf of a plant or tree, that oxygen can be released into the atmosphere. Okay, so next, this is just more showing the picture of how your electron here is falling down the electron transport chain. It's basically electrons going down energy levels. And when that happens, hopefully you know from chemistry, that energy can be released. All right, so that energy is then used to bring these hydrogen ions across the concentration gradient. And so it builds up. And so now inside of our thylakoid, we have more hydrogens than outside. And so now we have a true concentration gradient where we can see over here on the right, the hydrogen ions are going to go through this enzyme over here. Okay, so photosystem I, same things happen. That electron within the chlorophyll is excited because of light energy. And so that excited electron is actually going to allow for your NADP plus to be reduced into NADPH. Okay, so NADP plus is just an electron carrier. And so when it's NADP plus, it's missing 2 electrons. And so in my picture here, it's kind of shown like a little rectangle with 2 half circles. Those are representing the 2 spots where electrons can fit into this molecule. So when we reduce it, it's a reduction because reduction is gain. Remember, another one people use is oil rig. Maybe your teacher did that. Oil rig is oxidation is loss, reduction is gain. So that's another acronym to remember, reduction and oxidation. Okay, so if we have NADP plus and all of a sudden it's NADPH, it has been given 2 hydrogen ions, and so those are 2 electrons, because if you have a new atom, electrons come with it. Okay, so reduction is gain. So we have reduced NADP plus, and we have this concentration gradient right here where we have a lot of hydrogens inside this space. And so now they're going to flood through this enzyme called ATP synthase. If you've learned about cellular respiration, same enzyme. And so same idea, we this movement of hydrogen ions through this ATP synthase was actually like spins it like a turbine. And that movement literally phosphorylates an ADP molecule into ATP. So that's where ATP is made at the very end here. Okay, so that's just showing your hydrogen ions. ATP synthase is right there. And we've made a couple things of ATP. So your biggest things here, I've put all the things that are created or are produced in this light reaction. They're going to be boxed with a turquoise box. So we have oxygen here, NADPH, and ATP. Okay, so those things are going to head to the next cycle. So this is just part one of photosynthesis. Lots going on, but biggest things are we have light energy coming in through photosystems and electron transport chains. We have broken up water to make oxygen. We have reduced NADP plus. And so it's carrying electrons, right? Electrons are our energy. It's carrying electrons to the next cycle. And then we have also made some ATP, which is going to be used for the next cycle as well. All right, so the next cycle is called the Calvin cycle, independent reaction. This diagram is crazy. This diagram on the left has a big lightning bolt through it because you are so lucky you don't have to know that. When I took AP biology many, many years ago, we had to memorize every tiny little coordinated series of reactions that happened in the Calvin cycle. It was crazy. It was ridiculous, and you don't have to do that. Yours is this on the right. It's very, very simple, but the types of questions you're going to be asked are a little bit more elevated. It's not going to ask, oh, what's the name of the molecule made after Rubisco joins in with molecules of CO2. It's not going to ask easy questions like that. So anyway, remember, we have ATP and NADPH, which are brought over from the light reactions, and those are going to be used as energy sources to make carbon dioxide into a 3-carbon sugar. Just think of it this way. You're going from a gaseous CO2 molecule and you're making an actual sugar molecule, like an actual solid molecule. It's called carbon fixation. So you're fixing carbon, you're changing it a ton, and it's a series of very organized and coordinated events. And so you need energy. And so part of that energy comes from being able to oxidize NADPH. So oxidizing, remember, means oxidation is the loss of electrons. So we can rip 2 electrons from NADPH molecules. And so that movement of electrons allows us to reconfigure and change our carbon molecule of CO2 into a 3-carbon sugar, so for every molecule of CO2, you can make a 3-carbon sugar. So for every 2 molecules of CO2, you would run through this cycle a total of 2 times, and then you'd be able to make a 6-carbon sugar. The reason that most things won't say that it's fully making a 6-carbon sugar is that sometimes a plant will just use the 3-carbon sugar for something else. It's not always going to make a perfect sugar molecule at the end. Okay, I'm going to look at your questions real quick and make sure. Okay, so Hannah asked, NAD being reduced or oxidized between the reactions, get confused about what is being reduced versus oxidized. So Hannah, did what I just went over help answer your question? Yes? Ah, yay. Okay, good. All right. Love it. Hannah asked, what is the difference between NADPH, NADH? And okay, good. Okay. So Hannah had a question about NADPH versus NADH. So the electron carriers that have the letter P in them, think P for photosynthesis. So you are only going to see NADP and NADPH as electron carriers in photosynthesis. In cellular respiration, they are NAD and NADH. Okay, so they're the oxidized and reduced versions of themselves, but they serve very similar function in both reactions. So just think the P is photosynthesis, or that's how I remember it. Okay. And then Dakota had a question about what's the difference between chemiosmosis and cellular respiration and photosynthesis. So chemiosmosis has to do with ATP synthase. And so when we have the hydrogen ions flying through the ATP synthase to make ATP, the big difference between cellular respiration and photosynthesis, One is that in photosynthesis, you're not making a ton of ATP. You don't have a huge concentration gradient. You're making just a couple molecules of ATP, where in cellular respiration, ATP synthase is making the most ATP out of glycolysis and Krebs cycle and then electron transport chain. So in cellular respiration, it's making a ton of ATP versus photosynthesis, it's not making as many. But then also in photosynthesis, it's relying on the phosphorylation is coming from energy powered by the sun. And so it's not, with cellular respiration, it's not dependent on the sun. Okay. All right. Yeah, you're welcome, Dakota. Okay. So here is a practice free response question. Not necessarily, I would say this would be something I would maybe put on a test. So for this one, it says student A says that since plants carry out photosynthesis, they do not need to carry out respiration. Student B says that photosynthesis without respiration is a wasted effort. So who's correct or incorrect or less wrong or more right? Explain your answer. I wrote this question because one of the skills that the College Board says that would work perfectly for this topic is that you need to be able to support a claim with evidence from principles and concepts. So basically, make a claim first as to who's right and then support it using stuff you know. So I'll give you a second to just think on your own which student is right or more right, and can you explain why? So student A says that since plants carry out photosynthesis, they don't need to carry out respiration. Student B says that photosynthesis without respiration is a wasted effort. Who's correct, incorrect, or less wrong or more right? Okay. So here's how I would break it down for points. This is just, again, this is not from an AP College Board free response question. I just wrote it. I would give 1 point for someone saying that student A is incorrect, because that's one of the biggest misconceptions is that everyone thinks of photosynthesis and cellular respiration as, oh, photosynthesis happens in plants and cellular respiration happens in animals. And that's not right, because plants and protists that can do photosynthesis, they have mitochondria, right? We talked about that in one of the earlier streams. We talked about how living things having mitochondria and needing to do cellular respiration for energy is one of the more highly conserved organelles. So 1 point for saying student A is incorrect. 1 point for having an explanation talking about how plants recycle carbon and energy by coupling photosynthesis and cell resp. So it's not a waste. So in that question, I'd want you to maybe talk about how, saying that it's not a waste, which is what student A said, but coming up with a rebuttal as to why is that, that diagram I showed you in the beginning of how the products of photosynthesis are used for cellular respiration and the products of cell resp are used for photosynthesis. And it's this perfect coupling of reactions that makes amazing sense. It's great for recycling. It's great to keep things simple. And it's also using molecules that are readily available, which is pretty cool too. I'd also give another point for saying just basic stuff about how plants have chloroplasts and mitochondria. So photosynthesis and cell resp occur. If student A was correct, then there'd be plants that have chloroplasts and no mitochondria at all. And then also explaining in detail what are the reactants and products. So anytime you say something like, oh yeah, they're recycling energy and carbon, be specific and say cellular respiration uses this and expels this. Photosynthesis is using that and expelling this, and look at how it's a cycle. Maybe draw a diagram. But I think you'd be in good shape if you're able to talk about that. All right. All right. This next question is taken from, I believe, the 2013 AP free response question. I just redrew it and kind of made it more not simple, but kind of in our own words here. So here's a diagram. showing just a simplified carbon cycle. So we have carbon dioxide here on the left. Process 1 is showing how we go from carbon dioxide to a sugar. Excuse me. And sugar, for process 2, it's saying we're moving from sugar to carbon dioxide. So part A wants you to identify the key process for step 1 and step 2. So what could we call that? B, explain what's happening to carbon. Okay, so if I'm going from carbon dioxide to sugar, what do we call what's happening to it? And then C, focus on the role of energy. So where's energy coming from, or what energy is being expelled or transformed? And then D, identify an organism that carries out 1 and 2. So I'll give you a second. Feel free to take a picture of this if you want, or I think it's 2013, the AP test. I can't remember. But like I said, I know somebody had asked a question earlier about what's available online, and you could just Google AP Biology FRQs and you'll get a ton. Okay. I know I'm not giving you a ton of time to think of this, but we're already at 45 minutes, and I know that this is not your only AP class, and I want to respect your time. So I would say, so 1 point for recognizing that process 1 is photosynthesis. Okay, so we're going from CO2 to sugar, and 2 would be cell resp. All right, so it's really just an overview of the diagram we did in the beginning. Number 2, talking about what's happening to carbon. So in photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is fixed, or you could say carbon dioxide is transformed to a sugar molecule. And then in cellular respiration, organic molecules, the sugar molecule is broken down. And energy, so where's the energy coming from for photosynthesis? It's light. And then cellular respiration, it's using energy, and going from sugar to CO2 is allowing us to create a lot of ATP for energy. So you just talk about ATP production. And then the carbon output for photosynthesis, you'd want to talk about sugar, and then cell resp, it'd be CO2. And then what kind of organisms do this? You could just say plants, or photosynthetic protist, algae, CO2 fixing bacterium. If you did carbon cycles in AP biology, you probably talked about that. If not, again, you could have just said a plant and talk about a plant that you know that does photosynthesis. Okay. All right. So again, I'm going to remind you of these practice questions. These would be really good for you to maybe like in a day or two, look at this question, look at this statement, and see if you can do it. So feel free to take a picture of this if you want to. This is a lot better than just answering fill in the blank type of questions or looking over your notes over and over and over again. So review by looking at a question like this and actually doing it. Okay. I'll post the slides tomorrow when I download the presentation. But here's a picture. This is a computerized picture of what I'm thinking about for this question, diagramming the thylakoid. Again, you don't have to make it this intense. It can just be pretty basic. But if you're able to diagram it and talk yourself through what's happening, you'll be okay. And then this is your other review practice question. So trace the path of an electron through photosynthesis, starting with water and ending with glucose. So again, if we think of this as a redox reaction, again, that's the most biologically basic thing, is that we have something that's getting electrons added to it and being reconfigured, and something that's having electrons taken away from it and being reconfigured. And so electrons are this energy source of, if I'm ripping electrons off of something, it's going to go somewhere else and it's going to make something new. So this would be a really cool one too, to trace the path of an electron. From beginning to end. So here's an example of the first part. If I were to trace an electron through photosynthesis part 1, it looks something like this, where it starts with oxygen, it's going down into the photosystem, and then it's dropping down to the electron transport chain, and then it's also then being used to reduce NADP+. Knowing about entropy and Gibbs free energy is outside of the I'll have to use like AP College Board language. They would call that outside of the scope of the course. And so it's not something, you guys are actually really lucky. It's outside of what you would need to know and what you are responsible for. So yeah, which is actually really nice. It might be mentioned, and depending on your teacher, if they've been teaching AP Biology for a long, long time, they could maybe be focusing on some stuff that was used in old AP stuff or old AP exams. But luckily, if you can even go to the AP College Board and look at the new curriculum, I don't know what they call it, the curriculum something description. Here it is. What's it called? What do they call it? I forget what it's called. Sorry. But if you go to the AP College Board website, you can download a PDF of the full description of the course. And then under each unit, it will tell you certain things that are outside of the scope of the course. And so one of the things is entropy and like Gibbs free energy is outside of the scope. They don't want you to focus on that. And so, yeah, that's it. Good question. Okay, that's it for tonight. We are at 50 minutes, so thank you so much. Thanks, Dakota. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks. Who else was here tonight? Sandra, thank you for coming. Rachel, Ari. I think that's it. Awesome. You guys are all great. Thank you. Have a good night. We'll see you next time.